All right, I've sent in a request for coffee to be brewed. So, quick break while I actually go get the coffee that got brewed. I asked for it and like 30 seconds later the message from our chatbot showed up. Coffee got brewed. Nice. It works. Welcome everyone to the Pat and Paul Show. My name is Paul Michelotti. And Pat has once again abandoned me in favor of going skiing with his boss. The guy's a real ladder climber, really moving up the rungs, really making moves. So I am joined by Ben Westrate, formerly known as Ben Westgate, of prior video fame. Ben, thank you for joining me today.
It's good to be back.
You recently came off of a project, and I won't get into client names or anything like that, but you recently came off of a project where you were building a display for the app that essentially would be displayed on a large screen kiosk.
Mm-hmm. This particular client needed to display information for their visitors in a way that showed them where they were in the building and then showed them how to get to from point A to point B, and more information about the particular building that they were in.
Do you know how many locations it's in now?
It's in 11, maybe 12 different locations with interactive displays. And there are 2 displays on every floor by the elevators that are static.
Right.
It's the same experience, just a static version of it.
What was the technology stack that was in place for this project?
So this particular client was already on AEM for a different project that they had going. So we decided to use AEM as our kind of content server, and that's basically it.
Mm-hmm.
So it basically hosted a page for each location of the kiosk. Or each kiosk, I should say, and then from there on down, it was a React Redux stack that used for making sure that touch interactions were quick. We used Hammer.js. This particular client needed to have some pretty strong caching, so that if the player did go offline or the computer lost a connection, it would be able to still function for a number of days.
Right. I imagine there's a number of complexities unique to the fact that it's going to be in a kiosk that you don't get when you're building just a web page for the web.
Right. Yeah, there are some particularly like this offline capability, like I was talking about. Service workers were a key in making the offline capabilities happen on this particular application. So they would go off and request data in the background and make sure it was there for future use. And then some other like display centric, like actually UI centric issues where like this particular client wanted to add a new store or something like that to the list of places you could go. We were constrained to the very specific size of device, and so it couldn't really flex. And if it did, it needed to flex smaller so more things could fit on the screen.
Right. So there was no, especially in the ones that aren't interactive, there's no vertical scrolling or anything like that.
Yeah, and that was a design requirement that the client had too, is that everything that they wanted to be interactive had to be on the screen. You couldn't like scroll to one side or the other, which I think in the end ended up creating a really nice experience.
So that's an interesting problem that I hadn't really thought about before. The fact that I guess it's similar to a mobile app to some degree, but like if it is a kiosk with zero interactivity, you're absolutely constrained to the amount of space that you have on that device.
Yeah.
That presents, especially if this was something that was being legitimately authored in some interface like AEM,
Right.
there's a lot of limitations around, well, how
Right.
many things can you have? What are your character limits for these things in various languages and things of that nature?
Yeah.
Because that layout's going to break super fast.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing that as we as we went on, we were happy to work with, or the designer was happy to work with us. The design really dictated that, and so we had to kind of adapt the design to fit the actual values rather than just like happy path
Right.
values. So
If you were evaluating sort of the media player and the whole setup for a digital kiosk, if a client brought you in and said, I'm looking at these 10 vendors, let's evaluate which one to actually go with, what are the sort of things that you'd really look for in this sort of system? Because I've got my list,
You've
so
got your list.
I'll
All right.
check it off as
We'll see how
you cover them.
we'll
Yeah,
see how I
I'll
do.
see what you get. This will be a nice quiz.
The first thing I would look for is some modern browser base, so
Yep.
like
Number one,
Chromium or something like that. The second thing would be the ease of management for the screens, or the different locations of screens. So be able to manage what's on those at each location, or distribute one thing to all of them or something like that. So like a content management for that. The other thing would be the ease of like the actual installation of the devices. The client that we worked for, that was actually the largest holdup throughout the whole process, which is new to a web developer, right? We never have to deal with hardware, but
Right, people deal with their own hardware.
yeah. So it was pretty frustrating to have to deal with a vendor that was taking their time. It really pushed back our dates, and
because this is all custom hardware. Then, like, this is not a lot of these. So when I originally came out, like you could do sort of your own build. Like you can go and buy a Mac Mini or a little Android device or something and hook it up to the TV and
Right.
have your own custom thing. But a lot of these companies either do their own hardware or like contract out the production of this hardware that's then specific. It comes with the build that's able to connect to their CMS.
right. The original launch date was pushed back by 2 months
Because of the
that.
hardware.
Because of hardware.
Jeez. It would be difficult to plan for a 2-month delay.
Right,
But
right.
certainly you want to plan for some wiggle room around, like you can't assume that you're gonna have all of this stuff ready to go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So another thing they ran into was just the actual installation. Like they ran into things they didn't expect in an old building. So that all that kind of stuff was an interesting foray into the physical world, rather
like
than
rusty plumbing,
Yeah.
bad pipes, burst
Or,
pipes,
You know,
ghosts in the
10,
wall.
10 feet of solid concrete,
Like
you know,
haunted.
that kind of thing.
You're talking
Yeah.
about a haunted building
Yep.
situation. You're
Pretty
talking
much.
about these ghosts did not want automated kiosks. They wanted the old maps. People had to stand there and socialize. And they said, not in my building. With the solution that you worked with, what sort of fleet management would you say that it had?
Like I said, we used AEM, but we did not use AEM screens. At the time, it was just too much in a beta state to consider. And so the way that we accomplished it was we actually just had a separate page in AEM for each device.
Sure.
So which actually ended up working well for the client, because at the entrance they may have wanted to try some different content versus the second floor or the third floor.
Yeah.
And so they could author those different pieces per page, and those devices were directly pointed at that URL.
Right. So pointing those at the URLs, was that something that was configurable somewhere, or was that something that was like, you had to get to the physical device and do a thing?
Yes.
Perfect. Next question.
So this particular software, they chose to not buy the upgraded version that let you manage them remotely. So you had to have either a thumb drive or actually touch the computer and monkey with it to point it to the right URL. And so
So that's not ideal.
No.
Was there anything built or in place around like tracking the health of these displays? Any sort of heart beating that was going on, anything like that?
There is. We did have some analytics that they wanted to track for each, click or tap or something like that, and I know that's the way that the business was going to keep track of how the devices were doing.
That doesn't really cover the non-interactive.
Right. And that was actually a bigger problem for them, because the non-interactive ones were actually the ones that had the biggest problem staying online.
Interesting.
So, and again, that upgraded software that they could have purchased would have had the heartbeat and automatic, alarms and all that kind of stuff if a device went offline. But from my knowledge, at least when I was there, they had chosen not to.
So you're saying they were cheap.
Yeah.
You're saying they were cheap, and there's consequences to their financial decisions.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can respect that. Well, I don't respect it at all, but I can respect that you said it.
Much appreciated.
So when it comes to fleet management, like talking about like what kind of content is on the screen, like in my opinion, you want one of two things, or potentially both things. You want some sort of rules engine that would basically dictate what channel goes on the screen based on certain conditions.
Right.
So
right.
It's past 10 a.m. or show this channel. It's what we call lunchtime. It's between 11 and 1. Show this channel.
Sure.
So on and so forth.
There's no activity in front of this display, so show ads or something like that.
Right. And so that actually gets to number 2, is that you kind of want some sort of event system. There needs to be something. So the rules, like having rules that are like, it's after 10 a.m. is not particularly interesting. Like that's not that's a fine rule, and it's certainly fine for, if this is just a digital menu board that's supposed to show a different breakfast menu than a lunch menu, but it's not super useful for, I want to actually target some piece of content based on what I think the constituency of my store is at a certain point in time. If I think there's more men than women in my store, I want to change what's on this screen. And for that, you almost need a more generic event engine. And maybe this isn't even part of like the fleet management, but there needs to be some, in my opinion, there needs to be some mechanism to ingest events, or for you to be able to report events to whatever the content management system is, and for that content management system to be able to react to those events.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually something this client wanted to do in the future, is be able to react to whether it was a male or female standing in front of it.
So they wanted to get personal. Were they going to like just stick a camera up there and do some sort of facial detection?
The displays actually had cameras
already built in.
Yeah, they had.
And they're not using them for anything. They're just there.
Yeah.
Was there anything else built in? Did it have like built-in beacons or anything like that?
Yeah, it had built-in beacons, proximity sensors, like
motion sensors?
Range, yeah. And
really?
like literal proximity sensors. So
okay. So
gauge how far you were from the display.
I'm 5 feet, or like I'm blind and like licking the display.
You got your nose against the glass.
Right.
Yeah.
And then so the media player itself, did it expose any sort of API like via the JavaScript that you would have been able to tap into to do things?
No.
So that sounds like something to put on the list
that
of
would
things to
definitely
look
be
for.
something to look for.
Because it follows, in my opinion, I know that you don't have to build these experiences using web technologies. It just seems like the most like immediately accessible way to do it. But a lot of these, like this whole setup seems very Cordova-esque, right? Like, I imagine a lot of them are like very literally Cordova-esque, but the concept of you have a plugin for something. So if you have a proximity detector, there's a plugin for the proximity detector that's installed with the media player that you then expose a JavaScript API so that you can do something in the actual application when you recognize, okay, somebody's literally 2 feet away from you and they've been there for X amount of time. Now I can do something. Now I don't know what you do, target some advertising, or you could pop up some menu that's like, hey, do you need additional help? Or
Yeah. So the way this client wanted to do it is switch from, they wanted to show ads full time unless there was someone standing right there.
Okay.
And so like it would be like a moving advertisement display like you see all over different venues, but when you walk up to it, it actually changes to an interactive.
Do you think people would actually
display.
Recognize that was like a map that was there?
Yeah, that was our question, is whether like, because it'd have to be more out of
in
like
between every single ad, it would have to be like, hey, I'm a map.
Right. Yeah.
Come check me out.
It did have the custom cases said information on the top, so
yeah, but information could be the ad.
Yeah,
like who knows what information means?
It's true. I think in most contexts.
I've got some information about trolls too. So it sounds like this particular setup wasn't necessarily using the full suite of what you'd really want to be using in this sort of situation, because you really want a central management hub where you're able to see, these are my displays, or my devices, this is what's showing on each of the devices. I want to change what's showing on this device. Here's the rules for what should show on each device based on time, based on date, based on an event occurring. And this is really, all of these things are just events, right? Abstractly. So all of this stuff is just, hey, this event occurred, it's associated with this location, which is associated with this device, so send the event out to this device and let it do whatever it's going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then your events can come from anywhere. Your event could be, hey, this news story just got posted on Tribune.com, and it's about this subject, and so I'm now going to shift what I'm showing on the screen to be these particular stock prices or something.
Or there's an emergency and you need to display pertinent information about that.
So that's interesting. Were there any requirements for that for this project?
There were. They were scrapped because they didn't
care about people.
Yeah, right. The problem was that some of these devices may be offline.
Right.
And so there wasn't a way to guarantee that particular event would get pushed to the display in real time. And so
but that's always going to be the case.
Well, there in the case where you were talking about, like in a perfect world where we have some kind of heartbeat, it's a way of knowing that these devices are online, and two-way communication between like the server or the content management system and the device, we'd be able to have a level of certainty that the event was received by the device, right?
Well, you'd also have a certain level of certainty that the event absolutely wasn't received by the device.
Right,
So,
exactly.
I mean, that's important information too.
Yeah.
And you'd probably want I imagine you'd want some sort of event queuing mechanism at least for certain types of events, like hey, there's an emergency event, so that once the device does come back online, it starts getting these events again.
Exactly. Yeah.
What else do we got? What else is exciting about kiosks? It seems like there's a danger, though, of like the danger that I always see people running into when they start talking about this stuff is that there's a real danger of it getting gimmicky really quickly.
Sure.
Like the experience just being a gimmick. You know, the experience of like I walk into the store and something pops up on a screen that's like personalized to me. Like unless that's a really meaningful experience, it's just going to be a gimmick, and I'm going to be like, well, that's weird. Why does the store like know that I'm here?
Right.
Standing in front of the screen. And like I'm getting no value from this engagement, so like it's a really fine line. Right. So maybe somebody cares. Maybe I'm just the wrong demographic, like, and I don't care about these things. Well, maybe
I think it depends on
maybe they're targeting idiots.
Yeah, well,
that's a
goal.
Is that what they're going for?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity for, like with this client, for mapping solutions that are super helpful, that, you know, especially in environments that change rapidly, that allow you to get away with just changing maybe an ID or a retailer name, and there you go, all your maps are updated.
Right.
I know for this particular client that was a big money saver in the long run. So
very good, Ben. Thanks for joining me.
Yep, thank you.
We're gonna wrap this up. Let's see if I can come up with something funny to put at the end, because I don't know if there were a lot of goofs and spoofs in this one. Not a lot of EOs. I know. He's the slapstick guy. So I'm all business all the time. Can we talk about the fact that the community around these sort of displays has decided to call these driving systems content management systems? Like, this is a real semantic quagmire whenever I'm talking to one of these people, because inevitably I'm talking to them about integrating with AEM.
Right.
And I'm forced then to talk about AEM as an experience management system, because I can't say content management system. Like, why couldn't they call it channel management system?
I don't know. It's super...
You still get CMS, so you don't have to change any of your bath towels. I mean, we can't just call everything content. I can call a data warehousing system a content management system, right? If the content that I'm managing is the data, and I'm managing it by putting it in a warehouse, can we just... Let's calm down. Was it originally channel management system? And I can see some CEO walking into, some CEO of some startup walking into like the presentation with Popeye's chicken, and they're like, well, we got our CMS, our content management system. And it's like, obviously now no one can correct him, so you got to go out and change all the websites, and
it's super confusing, and it's confusing for clients too.
Yeah.